I'm Deborah Leff, Director of the Kennedy Library, and on behalf of myself and John Shattuck, CEO of the Kennedy Library Foundation, I want to welcome you to our final forum of this calendar year. Corporate responsibility, or the lack thereof, has been a hot issue for the Bush administration, but it was also a hot issue for the Kennedy administration. Let me begin by taking you back to 1962, when U.S. Steel decided to raise steel prices, bringing about fears of an inflationary spiral. President Kennedy responded by immediately calling a press conference, and as you'll see from this clip in our audiovisual archives, he was none too temperate.
The simultaneous and identical actions of United States Steel and other leading steel corporations increasing steel prices by some $6 a ton constitute a wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. In this serious hour in our nation's history, when restraint and sacrifice are being asked of every citizen, the American people will find it hard, as I do, to accept a situation in which a tiny handful of steel executives, whose pursuit of private power and profit exceeds their sense of public responsibility, can show such utter contempt for the interests of 185 million Americans. In short, at a time when they could be exploring how more efficiency and better prices could be obtained, reducing prices in this industry, in recognition of lower costs, their unusually good labor contract, their foreign competition, and their increase in production and profits which are coming this year, a few gigantic corporations have decided to increase prices in ruthless disregard of their public responsibilities. Price and wage decisions in this country, except for a very limited restrictions in the case of monopolies and national emergency strikes, are and ought to be freely and privately made. But the American people have a right to expect, in return for that freedom, a higher sense of business responsibility for the welfare of their country than has been shown in the last 2 days. Some time ago, I asked each American to consider what he would do for his country, and I asked the steel companies. In the last 24 hours, we had their answer.
Steel companies back down. Strong words from President Kennedy, who expected something more in terms of corporate responsibility. Tonight's forum, we'll talk about what is corporate responsibility and how can we bring it about. And with us tonight to discuss this on your right are New York Attorney General Eliot Spitzer, who has drawn national attention for his leadership in linking corporate responsibility to consumers and making sure that investors aren't getting a raw deal while a few corporations are padding their pockets. A graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School, Eliot Spitzer has been New York's Attorney General since 1999, and his leadership has sparked reform in the financial services industry. Beside him, Orrin Smith is the reason that I am addicted to a grande non-fat latte extra hot. He is the president and CEO of Starbucks Coffee Company, the leading retail, roaster, and brand of specialty coffee in the world with 5,000 retail locations. To Starbucks, corporate responsibility means a lot more than not doing wrong. Doing good is part of Starbucks' agenda, and Starbucks has a stated commitment to protecting the way of life for its coffee farmers by supporting social, economic, and environmental issues that are crucial to their livelihood. Richard Donoghue is the former president and currently the vice chairman of the board of Nike. Mr. Donoghue has practiced law for 50 years and has a lifetime of public service. He is on the board of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation and has chaired the Profile and Courage Awards Committee. And although he looks far too young for this to be true, Mr. Donoghue was a key aide to President Kennedy. He was, in fact, described in Teddy White's The Making of the President, 1960, as, quote, a coruscatingly brilliant young lawyer from Lowell, Massachusetts. And Dick, if you're so brilliant, can you tell me what coruscatingly means? I have to mention that scheduled to be here this evening was former chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, William Donaldson. But Mr. Donaldson apparently was so intimidated by this panel that he chose to take on something easy instead. Last week, President Bush nominated him to chair the SEC. And Mr. Donaldson, who I have known for years and is really a terrific guy, sends his regrets. He is not supposed to make public statements prior to his confirmation hearings. Guiding tonight's discussion is Harvard Business School professor Rosabeth Kanter, an advisor to major corporations and governments around the world. Professor Kanter has authored or co-authored 15 books. Last year, she received the Academy of Management's Distinguished Career Award, its highest award for scholarly contribution, for her impact on management thought. Tonight, she'll guide us through what management is thinking and should be thinking about. Professor Kanter?
Thank you and good evening. What a wonderful clip of President Kennedy, and I was thinking how far we've come, or have we? The past 15 months have been a time at which the public responsibilities of corporations have been in the news as they had not been for many years before that. In fact, in the past 15 months, it was the time at which, as Michael Kinsley of Slate magazine said, accountants were afraid to tell their mothers what they did. They had to claim that they were telemarketers. It was a time in which the E in CEO stopped standing for executive in the minds of some people and started standing for excess. It was a time at which I was even tempted to say that I was not from Harvard Business School, I was from Harvard University. Although that's really a joke because I'm very proud of my own institution's commitment to teaching ethics and social responsibility of companies. It's a time in which confidence in all institutions, of course, has declined, and Catholics aren't even able to pray for the fate of the stock market anymore because of scandals in those institutions. The terrorist attacks had emotional impact on Americans, but in many ways there was a form of economic terror that was caused by corporate malfeasance as people saw jobs lost and pensions reduced because of corporate accounting scandals. It was a time in which there was intensified voice of those that wanted to attack big companies for their power and also their practices. I did a web search on the number of websites that we could find under the category starsucks.com. So a generalized search, we found 57,000 hits, ranging from walmartsucks.com, chasebanksucks.com, and then beyond the .coms, there was milksucks.org, meatstinks.org. So those who had a grievance suddenly found that they had a huge megaphone on the web. And in fact, in the Boston Globe this morning, in announcing this panel, they said that gave advice to me as the moderator. They said if we were the moderator, we'd find it hard not to ask about huge corporate profits and the meager wages paid at the sweatshop end of the business. Well, this is a time in which some of our most ethical and responsible industries, like the pharmaceutical industry, started feeling like they were the tobacco industry because their pricing and marketing practices are under attack, going to the core of the business. This is a time when money is flowing to social investment funds because investors increasingly want to know about the practices of the companies in which they invest. It's no longer good enough to simply make money. How that money is made is on their minds. And to the question that had been asked for years at my school and other places, to whom are corporations responsible, to which the economist Milton Friedman gave the answer to only one group, shareholders, well, I think he's lost the argument because the companies sitting here now report their social responsibility and environmental responsibility and don't think of only one stakeholder above all to whom they answer. Well, all of this is occurring at a time when expectations for business are higher than ever before. In the 1990s, for example, it was assumed that business would solve social problems, that government simply didn't have the tools, the ideas, or the resources, so we turned to the business community. In the 1990s, business-like became the highest praise that one could give of any kind of organization. And in the 1990s, businesses increasingly rose to the challenge by taking on social causes and social issues. IBM, reinventing education, pouring $75 million into a path-breaking effort to improve public school systems in the United States and all over the world. And we'll hear about some of the other efforts that Starbucks and Nike have been making. More responsibility, more reliance on business, but also more protests, more backlash, and, as we've seen recently, misconduct of a kind that has rattled some of the foundations of capitalism. So at a time when companies increasingly say we are responsible beyond our shareholders in the conduct of our business, the question is, how can they satisfy everyone? Honesty and obeying the law are clearly job one. But what comes after job one? Mr. Spitzer, let me begin with you, because you are on the side of obeying the law. Are they all rotten?
No, of course not. I think that's, I could hardly say that and be gracious with two executives sitting immediately to my right. Maybe you and I could pontificate about the sins of corporate America. No, of course they're not all rotten. I think, though, that there is a tipping point beyond which there is a sufficient number of rotten apples in the barrel that we then presume that there is a rottenness that has permeated the entire barrel rather than the rottenness being an exception. What has become rotten, though, and I think what needed to change, was the rule structure and the governing structure within which corporations were operating. And I will be as brief as I can be, but just throw out one idea, which is that we went through a period 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that when we had an imperial presidency, when the other branches of government, where the checks and balances system in government had broken down, and consequently the presidency had too much power, and it led to improprieties. We have had a period of the imperial CEO. The reason we had the imperial CEO was that the checks and balances that were supposed to be exerted by boards of directors, auditors, outside lawyers, investment bankers, institutional shareholders were not imposed. There consequently was no check upon the excesses of the CEOs, and the system was out of whack. So what we are seeing now, beyond the particulars in investment banking, where I'm focusing, are Sarbanes and accountants, and likewise other particular focuses on particular links in this chain, is an effort to resuscitate the entire system of corporate governance, because that entire system broke down for reasons that we could discuss.
Okay, so there's a need for rules to rein in the power of the imperial CEO, just to get us back to a course in which we can count on the numbers, we can count on what we're getting from corporations. But is that enough? I mean, Starbucks has made a commitment, Mr. Smith, to do more than that. That is, to make a difference in the lives of the people who work for your suppliers, to make a difference in the lives of your communities. That's an even higher standard than just obeying the law. So what are you proudest of that Starbucks does? I said I'd start out with a softball. And then, but if you do that at Starbucks, do other people do it too? Are other corporations following you, or are the few good guys out there by themselves?
That is not as easy a first question as you might imagine, because we have so many great programs. I also have in the audience tonight, I understand, the CEO of Jumpstart. We're the primary sponsor of Jumpstart nationally. Unfortunately, I'm not going to put that at the top of my list, even though that is really a wonderful, wonderful program. But I think the program that I am most proud of is the commitment we have made to farmers in coffee-producing nations. And I put that at that level primarily because on the trips that I make, what I see in those countries is so heart-wrenching. And the impact of just minimal kinds of programs can have such a tremendous positive impact on their lives that it's hard not to place that at the very top of the list. We pay the highest prices in the world for coffee, 2 to 3 times what the mass coffee companies pay for coffee. We fund hospitals or clinics, schools, water supply systems, production systems in coffee-producing nations. We finance farmers through the harvest season and a myriad of other kinds of programs, some affecting the environment. Most recently, with the help of Conservation International, we formulated a procurement standard, which I believe is the most advanced for any of the agricultural products in the world. What that does is provide a 10-cent per pound incentive to the farmers, dependent upon their compliance with the social laws in their countries, which, by the way, are often very good. The problem is there's no enforcement. But we require a compliance and certification of compliance. We also have environmental standards that they must comply with, and we also demand transparency, in short, so we can see where the money is actually going, because our interest is that it gets down to the farmer.
And that's a wonderful statement of the kinds of things you do. Mr. Spitzer wants to stop the rot. I'm also interested in spreading the responsibility. So are other companies following your lead? And what do you do to make sure that they will if they're not?
Well, I think that there are a number of companies that are following the lead. There are some great programs out there. You mentioned a few yourself. But not all companies do that. And I'm not even sure today that the majority do. I do believe that the majority of companies are becoming more interested. And I'm not so sure that Starbucks is going to compel companies to have higher standards, but I do think that all of you can. In the end, it's the public, it's the consumers that will, if they demand, change the behavior of organizations. Unfortunately, we don't really exert our influence in that way in any great proportions.
Thank you. Well, as you are trying to be socially responsible, let me turn to Mr. Donohue, because Nike is in an interesting position, because Nike was one of the first signers of the Global Compact, which is UN Secretary Kofi Annan's attempt to get corporations to make a pledge to do business in a highly responsible way worldwide and help end global poverty. And yet, though you're a signer, Nike also gets attacked because it's not doing enough. So how much should you be doing? How do you feel about being among the good guys, putting yourself forward, and yet at the same time being the subject of attacks?
Because we're the biggest and the most prominent, we're always going to be attacked. And so we don't expect the attacks to cease. We expect, hopefully, that we can spread the message of what we're doing and have people understand us. Phil Knight, who is the president, said he is convinced that by the time he is dead, he would be well known as the most hated man in the industry, because people continue to spread hatred about the work that we do. Nonetheless, we've been able to make some very interesting observations and changes. We operate in many countries. We probably have 450,000, 500,000 people working at either stitching of manufacturing facilities that don't belong to Nike, but with whom we contract. And so we decided how we could figure out their lives and how we could do things better for them. Among them, we have set up a survey of how their working conditions are and what we can do to improve them. And we get them back, and I serve on a committee. Jill Conway, who is a member here, is the chair of the committee. We examine exactly what's happening. And one of the things that we were always thought that the employees would come back and say the pay isn't high enough or this isn't high enough. No, they asked what did they want. They wanted a safe place for their money. Could they have a bank? Could they have any kind of a credit union or thing of that nature? And we wondered, the other thing that we were really afraid of is sexual harassment. You have a whole bunch of young women working with some very, very tough managers, and what extent is that going to permeate? Frankly, it didn't come up. until we had to define for the people who were asking the questions what we meant by sexual harassment. And for many cultures, those types of things are very commonplace and regular. But nonetheless, we have made some inroads. We have embarrassed some of our competitors to change their methods. And so they will give a plaque or give a check and say, see what we're doing for human rights? And it frankly isn't as much as they could be doing. But it will not stop. Manufacturing is going to go to the low-wage place in the world, no matter where it is. The easiest thing for a country to do to get people from the farms into the factories is to bring in a sewing machine, because you can teach almost anyone to sew very, very quickly and very, very cheaply. And then you can produce a product. We have all kinds of quotas. We have all kinds of laws that prohibit the importation. So all we can do is, in the countries that we operate, try to obtain satisfactory working conditions. We do a lot of things, but we have minimum wage. We comply with minimum wage, exceeded, and all of that other stuff. Medical health benefits and things of that nature. All of these things are possible, but we should be able to do more, and we will be able to do more.
Thank you. How does all of this relate to shareholder value? Let me ask you first. I know, how does this relate to shareholder value? The classic measure, the Milton Friedman measure, does it connect, or is this a diversion?
Well, I will only speak for my own company, but we believe that social responsibility is an integral part of why we are a successful organization, and we believe that in the long run, it does add shareholder value. Corporate social responsibility, along with the commitment we make to our customers, the commitment we make to the people who work at Starbucks, are integral parts of the culture of our company. We believe it differentiates us from our competitors. We believe it is why the people we have in our stores make the kind of connection with the customer that they do, and build those long-term loyal relationships to keep those lines as long as they are wherever we put them. The most important people in this company are the people who make that connection with our consumer. They are young people, often more aware of world conditions, third world conditions, environmental issues than were their parents. They care about them. They can be inspired by them. And how proud they are of where they work is a very important part of who we're able to recruit, how we're able to retain them, and the kind of service that they give while they're in our employ.
Is there any relationship between the other aspect of this problem, that is being socially responsible, having a commitment to corporate citizenship, and being ethical and honorable in all the other business dealings? After all, didn't Enron have a corporate contributions program? Either of you want to? Yeah?
Oh, no. The truth of it is the Enron scandals have done more for corporate culture to subdue the enthusiasm that you could possibly have. Every company, every public company right now has to fight to protest its integrity, and has to do whatever it can to show and to try to build within itself its confidence back. If you go, I'd go to board meetings and meet with other directors, they're all having the same problem. How can we get back so that we're respected? You know, you can't be the Jack Welch and be the biggest man in the world one day and have a couple of slip-ups, and you're not necessarily still greeted with open arms every place.
You know, Rosabeth, one part of it which I think is critical is time frame. And when you listen to Oren, you hear him talk in terms of long-term dedication, long-term loyalty on the part of clients, employees, shareholders. One of the issues that I think unfortunately crept into our financial system over the past couple of years is that the time frame within which shareholders looked at their dedication and commitment to a company, even institutional shareholders and employees and customers as well, shrank to the point where there was no sense of a long-term dedication to any entity. And as a consequence, the behavior patterns that we have seen were altered as well. And I was at a meeting the other day with some of the largest both the individuals who controlled private capital and public capital, pension funds and private equity. And the debate or the discussion around the table was, how do you extend the time frame within which individual investors, and hence then consumers and employees, evaluate the return, however you define that term. Because unless we extend that time horizon, we will get behavior that looks for the shortest term return. The shorter term return will often be that return that an Enron will try to design based upon gamesmanship rather than long-term productivity. And that is one of the critical issues we have to think about.
So you're thinking of that in terms of, for example, short-term decisions to screw a supplier and go for the lowest cost, not necessarily the best working conditions. Short-termism, you're saying, drives all kinds of irresponsible decisions, whether they have to do with accounting shortcuts or other kinds of detriment to the environment or to the labor force.
Correct. And I'll give you just one example. One of my favorite quotes from our investigation, I don't quote him that often, but Jack Rubin got it really right when he talked about the investment banking culture of a certain period of time, when he said what used to be viewed as a conflict of interest is now viewed as a synergy. Now, the only way you can do that is if you're making money on both sides of the equation, which is, last time I checked, still wasn't the right way to do business. But the reason he felt he could get away with that was that in the time horizon within which people were concerned, they could get away with it without the issue of loyalty and that fundamental tension being uncovered and coming back to haunt them. And so in every context, that time horizon matters.
Okay, so we have a time horizon issue. Do we also have a transparency issue? As more is disclosed, not only about the internal operations of the corporation and the numbers, but also about these practices externally. I mean, maybe those watchdogs that are kind of a pain in the neck to a Nike or even to a Starbucks, where the questions in the Globe today about what price you're actually buying the coffee at, are they actually a helpful force because they mean more is disclosed, more has to be accounted for, more has to be answered to the public, not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of justifying practices of corporations? So would that be a second piece of the equation?
Well, if you're referring to the advocacy groups and some of the NGOs, net, I think they make a positive contribution, which doesn't mean that they don't, from time to time, infuriate me, because they will use whatever they need to get their message out, and sometimes we're the object of that. Our stores are great places to make your case to the world, because the television cameras will be right there, and the next day everyone in the world will know about that protest. So some of the kinds of things that we have protests about have nothing really to do with us, except that we're a convenient way to get that message out. But there's no question in my mind that it causes us to focus on things we might otherwise overlook. And for the most part, the NGOs that we encounter work with us productively here at home or in the third world countries. It's only a small number of them that are unreasonable and abuse us in certain ways.
How do you feel about the pressures for transparency because of all those watchdogs and people ready to pounce on you?
We welcome them in the sense that they do serve a useful function. They can. We use them as allies frequently. But the fact is that there is a need for policing of corporate America. I mean, the things that have gone on that are going on just are not acceptable. They aren't acceptable in any reasonable society. I mean, people are basically have been stealing. Now, stealing by votes, by directors authorizing executives to do unbelievably obscene bonuses and things of that nature, that just is wrong. And I'm delighted, not pleased, but I'm delighted that it's eventually coming so that every director that I know of is worried now, are we doing the right thing? And by the right thing, they're not saying the safe thing, the proper thing, the honest thing. And if you've got that spreading, it'll spread very quickly. But it's there, and it will not be cured with a few more perp walks.
Okay.
Well,
So, yes.
let me
Elliot,
respond
yeah.
to something Richard just said. I agree that transparency is critical, and the sunlight is the best disinfectant and all that, and it works. And the fact that the so much of this has been played out in public over the past couple of years, has made an enormous difference. At one level, it's been affirmative because boards and directors now are concerned about doing what is right. On the other hand, getting somebody to join a board is much more difficult now, and getting the quality board members whom we need will be difficult down the road. That doesn't mean we shouldn't stop elevating the standards and imposing exacting standards. But transparency alone is insufficient. The SEC has forever been the definition of an organization that believed that disclosure, transparency, and then let the marketplace do what needs to be done. And yet with that entire flow of information into the marketplace, somehow things got derailed. Even though, as Richard points out, boards were in their minutes disclosing the fact that they were approving bonuses and option packages and all the rest, nothing was done about it. So it takes more than disclosure. It takes disclosure plus the backbone on the part of those who see what's going on than to act upon it. And I think you need those multiple pieces.
Okay, so we have several factors now that can improve the situation. We have transparency, but also leadership, backbone. We have rules and policing and longer time horizons. And that's to get us up to a standard we can live with, feel good about. You can be respectable again. The E and CEO can stand for executive, and they can be honored again. But should the standard be even higher? Because what some of the critics of corporate power are now saying, as they talk about the 200 largest corporations dominating the world, is that the standard now should be even higher. Businesses should not only be honest and ethical in their own dealings, they should be ending global poverty. They should be taking on the problems of the world. Should they? Should they?
Well, look, I'll speak up. You may think that I'll be the one who should answer that affirmatively. I think I agree with Oren that there's a social responsibility that should permeate one's vision of how you operate, and I applaud, and I will be forever, having heard your wonderful introduction, I will now enjoy paying more than for Starbucks than I pay for my 30-cent cup of coffee and from yesterday's burned arid coffee. But now I'll buy Starbucks.
It works for shareholder value, yes.
But it will only work so far. You cannot push back to the private sector responsibilities that only governmental entities can really, at the end of the day, absorb. And that is the byplay and the interplay that we need to think about. You cannot ask the private sector, driven by the obligation to make a profit, to fundamentally take responsibility for education, health care, infrastructure. It won't work. Those of us who've studied economics know it. Externalities don't permit it, and the marketplace won't support it.
But then how do we answer, again, the advocates and the critics who say companies are not doing enough, and with all of that power, they should be changing the world? I mean, that you should be changing not only the conditions on the plantations growing the coffee you buy, but having an impact on others. I mean, how do you answer that, and how do your employees answer that question?
Well, first off, I would agree with everything that Elliot said. There is a limit to what we can alone be accountable for. We can conduct our business in a responsible way, but we cannot necessarily cure poverty in some of these countries. We have no ability, no right to even interfere in some of the kinds of things that create those conditions, as, for example, corrupt governments are probably the single biggest factor in keeping many of the people in this world in poverty. We have no right or ability to change that. But we can conduct our business responsibly. We can work with NGOs to be more effective in doing that, and we can work with governments, as we do in Guatemala and Costa Rica, Colombia, and even in the U.S., to try to improve our practices and our effects on these developing countries.
How do you feel about that? Nike is a signer of the Global Compact?
Oh, yes. And we, but one of the things that Oren talked about is the biggest obstacle is corrupt government. We were just recently in Cambodia and in Vietnam and trying to talk about the business. We happen to manufacture in both of those countries and do rather well. The biggest impediment, however, is corrupt government. You can't get the government to enforce the laws that exist. For instance, who would go into Zimbabwe today? For what reason? I mean, you would lose your plant and everything else. And so that there are places where you can't go, and where you can go, you have to be very careful. Indonesia is probably one of the biggest problems that we have. We've manufactured a great deal of product there for many years, and yet we cannot develop the skill sets that are necessary to develop to get better productivity. So we have pulled out of there. It is a problem of that one industry or one company cannot change the mores of a country.
Well, now maybe then we have to throw the challenge back in another direction. Why aren't we saying to, for example, Eliot Spitzer, that why haven't you organized the Attorneys General Association of the United States to go over and help them get a good government in Zimbabwe and change the laws in those countries? Why are we now expecting business to be the force for change in the world?
Well, this may surprise Harvey Pitt, but I do recognize some limitations on my jurisdiction. You know, there are some things that only the national government can do, only foreign policy will do. And even there, it's a question of priorities. And however, having said that, within our domestic economy, there are pressures that we bring to bear. And I think of all the cases that I am proudest of that my office has handled over the last 4 years, it is the wage cases we have brought on behalf of essentially immigrant workers who are being exploited by various employers, working 70 hours a week for $2 an hour, sub-minimum wage, no benefits, in violation of range of New York laws. We went in on their behalf. Nobody had been helping them because many of them did have immigration problems, and they were therefore easily exploitable. And so, granted, this is not the international context, but in terms of shoring up those at the very bottom of the economic totem pole to define essentially a threshold of social behavior and a social dynamic and a social contract, I said even those who may not be citizens, may not be here legally, they deserve the same protections, and we have gone into court repeatedly in the greengrocer sector, in the garment industry, day laborers out in Suffolk, the migrant workers in upstate New York, on their behalf to ensure that they as well are the beneficiaries of the social compact that at least we have defined domestically within New York State.
Fabulous. You know, it's tough to be a moderator here because I'm agreeing with so many things, but have to be provocative. And maybe what I'm hearing is if there are limits to what businesses can do, and we have some socially responsible businesses that are applying their standards in other countries, but maybe that we are scapegoating business too much, and maybe we should be expecting more of government.
Well, look, I'm not...
The private sector now is expected to bear a lion's share of the responsibility.
I have never said that, and I don't want to parody those of us who believe government should do more and therefore excuse business. We are not scapegoating business for failing to resuscitate our educational system. We're scapegoating business for building a Ponzi scheme instead of a decent business model. I think let's be accurate in terms of how we are critiquing business and where its failures have been.
All right, now we have laid out an agenda of issues here. What some of the socially responsible companies are doing, what the problems are, what some of the solutions are. Let me throw it open to your questions and comments for anybody on the panel. Yes, sir. And can you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Roy Freed, and I find the income to corporate executives absolutely obscene. What can be done to rein in those indecent payments?
Okay, let me ask everybody on the panel to answer that question and also talk about whether you'd reduce your own salary. So who would like to start?
I don't have a definitive answer to that, but I'll provide you with some thoughts. And one of the things that makes this challenging, and I've seen a few CEOs on talk shows, and what they will go to is the marketplace. And what you'll find if you go out and try to recruit the CEO right now, especially one that has been successful, is that they have $10 million worth of stock options that are in the money and haven't vested yet. So right out of the gate, you have to write a check for $10 million just so you can begin to have a conversation. And for many people, that's obscene. But if you put yourself in the shoes of that individual, they're not going to move for that unless that kind of payment is made. And they're going to want a package that offers them the same kind of upside that they have in the company at which they're at. You know, I've asked myself, how did this get to this place where the system effectively dictates that you engage in that way? And I'm not sure that I know the answer to that whole thing, but I think it starts incrementally, that there's a CEO that persuades his board because they're so prosperous that this is a small thing. And once one CEO has gotten that package, it begins to be the target. And it keeps getting ratcheted up, and we create our own system that pays these kinds of salaries. Now, I don't think this could have happened without all of the prosperity of the 90s. And I think that if you look, you know, it's part of the kinds of things that Elliot was talking about. First of all, there's opportunity. There's a lot of money in the 90s that passed through corporations. Huge profitability increases. Huge stock price increases. You had the situation where the oversight of the institutions was not effective, and you also had the boards who weren't effective. It is hard to be an effective board member, to understand what goes on in the organization, to exercise that discipline. And when everything is good, the stock price is up, shareholders are happy, then they make those kinds of decisions they wouldn't make in other kinds of circumstances. And I don't think they're decisions that would be made today. The problem right now, I think, is how do you break out of the circle?
And I think Elliot has some ideas.
Well, I don't have any brilliant ideas, trust me. I was just going to add that and focus on institutional investors. I think if I had to look at one group and say to them, you blew it, it would not be the CEOs who merely were there and were ravenous consumers of what was presented to them. It was the institutional investors whose equity power was not exercised. And when I spoke to a luncheon of institutional investors, and they were all thrilled at the way I was attacking the investment banks and all the other links in this chain of corporate governance, and then at the end I said, okay, guys, that's been the fun part. Now let me tell you the truth. It's your fault. And that set them back a little bit. But the reason is that they are the ones whose equity, and because of their equity power, they had the control capacity, but they failed to use it. And I think that they, by letting these option packages be granted, by permitting them to be rolled over resetting the prices, there were things that were outrageous, and institutional investors never stood up. Unfortunately, I don't think we've broken through with institutional investors. Just last week, with the SEC proposal that mutual funds be obliged to disclose their proxy voting, which is simple common sense, transparency, all the things we're talking about. The mutual fund industry is opposed to it. It will confuse the investor. They say, well, that's the first cheap defense of anybody who's trying to pull a fast one on you. We don't need to give you information because the information we give you will confuse you. Okay, you know there's a game being played. So institutional investors really have to be shaken and awakened, and otherwise they all might as well just buy Vanguard and become an index fund. But if that happens, then we will have ceded all management control to non-equity shareholders, and that will be a big, big mistake.
Let me turn to other questions, unless you have a burning no, you'd rather not talk
There's
about
too many questions.
Right, okay. You want to identify yourself?
Sure. My name is Maura Siegel. I'm a student at the Harvard Business School. I believe that Coke yesterday announced that they would no longer issue earnings forecasts. And I'm wondering what you think of the idea of getting all public companies to band together to decide not to issue earnings forecasts, or different kinds of pressures that ultimately affect what happens within the corporation.
Well, they're not, Coke is not the first, and there have been others, and it looks to me like it's going to be a lot more, because earnings forecasts are a whipsaw tool. Whatever you do, you either miss or you make, and that is all of a sudden becomes a watchword of whether or not you're successful. And the easier thing to do is to just announce your results at the quarter, and then let the investing public make up its mind. This idea of the advisors or the Wall Street gurus making the market has probably been deceptive to us. So I would think it's going to expand. Any
other comments about that? I think that there are many companies that are have already found themselves engaging in bad behavior because of the forecasts and expectations. And we're hearing in responses to a number of these questions that we should have had Bill Donaldson here, because we should have an investment banking perspective on this, because Wall Street and their practices are a big piece of this equation that we have to talk about now only by proxy. Yes, sir.
Hi, Rob Waldron from Jumpstart. Hi, Rosabeth.
Hi, Rob.
Thanks for the plug, Laurie. I wanted to check, one of the things that I've seen in doing corporate work and having been in the corporate sector and now in the nonprofit sector is that in Starbucks' case, as you know, we get a lot of support from Starbucks. It's helped tutor 4,500 children around the country with your support. And you, to me, have one of the most socially responsible companies around. And I'm wondering how that started. One of the things that interests me as we approach other companies and so forth is, it just didn't appear one day. And if you could talk a little bit about the genesis of that and what led you to those decisions.
This is not something we layered on the company. It's part of the foundation of the company. In 1990, about a half a dozen of us sat around a table for a couple of days and decided what kind of company we wanted to build and how we wanted to conduct our business, which led to a certain set of principles that had to do with the way we would treat our people, had to do with how we would contribute to the communities and the environments in which we worked. That became then something that, and by the way, I would add that this is not so much different than almost any company does. You can find these same kinds of statements in the hallways of virtually every corporation in America. What's different is we said this is really the way we want to conduct our business. So this is what we tried to walk that talk as the leadership of the company. It's what we talked about when we had company-wide meetings, and it's the way we tried to behave. And I had mentioned earlier to this group before we came on stage that it is amazing how the behavior of leadership is mirrored throughout the organization. If we behave a certain way, our people will behave a certain way. And one of the things I am most proud of is that the vast majority of the socially responsible things that are done in our company come from our people. I don't even know about them. There are literally thousands of these initiatives that come out of our retail stores globally now. So it is an inherent part of the culture of the company.
Do you think that's more likely that you would either catch wrongdoing faster or not engage in it, having those values and promulgating them throughout the company?
I absolutely believe that. It is so important because there are many aspects of that. I have more than 60,000 people in the U.S. alone. Globally, it's approximately 100,000. I can't dictate. I will never see most of those people. I can't provide all the rules for their behavior. I can't control or check on all of that behavior. I rely on the culture of the organization to tell people the way they should behave.
Elliot, can you comment on that? Because American accounting standards are so detailed, and many boards have said, well, we complied with the letter of the rules. Now, what Oren is saying, that there's something beyond rules that have to do with values. In Europe, they don't have such detailed rules, but they do have a set of values by which companies lead. Is that another control system that we should see in American business?
Well, I had a discussion the other day about rules versus values, whether you could ever, through rules, get rid of this sort of misbehavior that we've seen in the past couple of years. And the answer probably is no. And in fact, the accounting examples is right, the paradigm everybody loves to point to. Should we just adopt the European system of a certain basic set of principles? I mean, I'll tell you, I have maybe a lawyer would pick up on this faster. I have a way of examining a company's financials. As a lawyer, whenever you have something you don't want anybody to see, you put in a footnote. And so what you have to do over the past decade is look at the ratio of text to footnotes in our accounting statements. And as that ratio has gone more and more to the footnotes, you know there's something fundamentally wrong that's being hidden from us. You know, the but-see, for anybody here who's a lawyer, the but-see citation is at the tail end of the footnote. That's what our accounting system became. So yes, you cannot, through rules, change values. And that's why I think what Oren is saying is so powerful. You have to either find people who are like-minded or somehow teach those values. Otherwise, the whole system is for naught.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jeff Ballinger, and I run a little nonprofit called Press for Change. And my question is for the Nike representative, and I'm so glad Mr. Donahue mentioned the survey work that Nike has been conducting, because last year I received a survey of the Indonesian workforce, and I was chagrined to find a lot of the things complained about by the workers were the same things that I was hearing back in the late 80s, early 90s when I was resident in Jakarta and had a lot of interaction with the workers. But what disturbed me more was the Nike 56-page remediation plan for Indonesia, which never mentioned restitution for all the workers, thousands of workers cheated out of minimum wage, which is well documented. Thousands of workers, were cheated when the wage was only $1.10 a day, and I think restitution should be made to those workers. There were also many workers fired. Is that a question?
Can you?
There's a question.
Yes.
The question is also, shouldn't restitution be paid to the brave workers who were fired for leading protests in that very repressive atmosphere in the late 80s, early 90s, and why didn't the remediation plan address that? I would think you would start there with those wronged workers instead of pledging to do better in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Ballinger is well known to the company. He has been a regular attender at shareholder meetings, and his complaints have been responded to time and again. There is no remediation plan. There is no determination that there was a loss of wages. But I would stand by our record.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Judy Rogers, and I spent a lot of years making films about business. And what strikes me, I want to go back to the point that Rosabeth raised earlier about what might business do. Because U.S. business is known for its ingenuity and its imagination. And it seems to me that there are a couple of areas where there's a possibility that's not being explored, and I want to understand what we might do. I'm thinking about, there's a businessman in Tel Aviv, Eric Meltzer, who has used his business to bring together Palestinians and Israelis. And I'm thinking about C.K. Prahalad's recent work on how the poor might be the new market. So I'm wondering, how do we shine the light on that? What do we do to put a light on the innovative areas in business and spread that, use that as a social innovation tool?
Aside from Harvard Business School trying to teach it, what else might we do to help spread the good things you do and to provoke more social innovation when business partners with its suppliers or when business decides that it's in its interest to address an issue?
Well, I'll take a piece of that. I think that, for example, the procurement standards that we have now on trial are just such an instrument because we can cause a lot of change to take place because, first of all, because of the prices we pay, coffee farmers want to be our supplier. And when we provide them with an incentive to comply with the laws in the country, with, for example, in Guatemala, require education, I think, through the 6th or 7th grade. Most often that's not enforced. But when we require that and require that it be certified, we will change the behaviors on those farms. I would also hope that these procurement standards would be adopted by, first, the rest of the specialty coffee industry. I'm very encouraged by what's happening now in Costa Rica, where our procurement standards have become the standard for certification by the Costa Rican government. Colombia is looking at those same procurement standards, and we've had initial discussions now in Guatemala. So I think that is an example of where we are going beyond the normal bounds. And I believe there are things that business can do. But by the way, I think that having the support of NGOs, which we had in this case, and support of government makes that far more effective. I think that when the three partner, it can be a much more powerful force because business alone just can't do all of these things.
Okay, so you're saying that business can exercise some ingenuity, but it helps to have strong partners because business is not the social development agency, the NGOs are, and the government is. And also business can convene other businesses and begin to encourage your peers to do that. And that's what we found in my research about when business has a big impact. Yes?
My name is Mangalam Srinivasan. I'm a Harvard affiliate, and I'm also on the corporate board of a very important computer corporation. And I sometimes chair their audit committee, and I'm also on the advisory to the Secretary General's UN Secretary General's Global Compact. And it's very well established that internal operations of companies often lead to the sustainability of the internal operations of the companies lead to sustainability in the community. As someone had stated, it's not my original thought. But definitely, I would like to find out, not that you can go in and eradicate poverty. I personally believe it has to be the country, its people, and so on. Definitely it can be aided in terms of the corporations producing wealth.
Can you try to frame a question?
Well, I think comments are just as important from all of these experts here, so if you would permit me to make this comment even in terms of diversity, I would appreciate it. I really would like to find out whether Harvard Business School has any responsibility, as are the other business schools in this country, which really train a number of people all over the world, and many of them, for example, Enron. I would like to know how much of Enron's gifts have come to Harvard, or Stanford, or Kellogg, or any of these. Now, this is a question. And definitely also, when we extol the virtues of all these young chairmen all over the world, trained in these business schools, and suddenly wake up to find there have been $1 billion given in bribery, whether it's in India for Enron, or 700,000 by Xerox, etc., etc. I would stop here just simply to ask whether it is possible for business school also to find out whether there's anything can be done in addition to the corporations which are engaged in the same.
Right. I have no idea how much money Harvard Business School has received. I would say we have done a great deal of soul searching about what we teach, how we teach it. And as I say, I'm proud to say that we have been working on these issues for a number of years, not simply provoked by a scandal. And now the mission of the Harvard Business School is to develop leaders who make a difference in the world. That's our mission statement. We just gave an award to our distinguished alumnus, Orrin Smith, but that's our mission. And so that has changed our curriculum dramatically, and I think we are beginning to have an influence on other schools as well. I think these are critical problems, and we bear a responsibility also. Yes, sir.
Yes. My name is Farouk Lam. I have a business background as well as a legal background, and I'm from the high-tech industry. Even though I work for a startup now, in the 90s I basically worked for two very big high-tech companies, one of which is currently under SEC investigation, one of which was. Given the level of fraud that has occurred in Wall Street, and given the dilemma that Mr. Spitzer said, where you basically have CEOs getting these huge pay packages and stock option grants, and you want them to be aggressive, my question to Mr. Spitzer is, and you've been more aggressive than the SEC, why have we not seen more people going to jail for the fraud that they've committed when common criminals who pass bad checks have been put in jail faster than some of the analysts that have basically defrauded the country of billions of dollars?
Well, the short answer, the short answer is, and I agree with you that I have prosecuted more people than anybody else, is that it's easier to prosecute somebody who uses a gun and holds up a store and steals $50 than it is to prosecute a CEO who satisfies the procedural requirements of getting a stock option package and then cashes out before the company tanks. It is a tougher criminal case, and we are amassing the evidence to make those cases, and we are beginning to see some of them percolate through. And I can tell you that some of us are spending many hours every day right now trying to rewrite the rules to ensure that there is proper governance and that small investors are protected and that employees are protected and that those who have been the victims would not be victimized next time round. So there is, at several layers, an effort ongoing. And I will tell you that my priority structure in terms of addressing the entire welter of issues that we see is first, get the rules rewritten so that the systemic change can be accomplished. Second, see if there is a way to get restitution for those who suffered in terms of lost wages, lost 401ks, which is market loss that was attributable to fraud. And third, exact the personal retribution upon those whose criminal acts can be prosecuted. That is the sort of three-point sequence that we are proceeding down. We may be on the verge of accomplishing one, and then we could move to 2 and 3 sequentially. They are not easy cases, but my office is certainly dedicated to making them.
Thank you. I think that's a popular position with this audience. So, yes, sir.
My name is Jim Dildine, and I'm a wounded private investor.
Join the crowd. Yeah.
My concern. I appreciate hearing about the good works that Nike and Starbucks are doing in terms of social action programs. I think that's an important role of a corporation, but I believe the constituency that has been taken out of balance in the last few years clearly has been the shareholder, and with regard in their balance with management and their balance with the public in general. And my own feeling is that one of the things that has caused this has been a lack of independence at the corporate board level. As an investor, it appears to me that the boards are basically groups of corporate executives who sit upon one another's boards, or other constituencies like business schools that are consultants to companies. My question is, which I will frame, how are we truly going to develop independent boards which take as their mission to look towards the interest of the investors?
Can you comment on also on your own board?
Well, matter of fact, because of the adoption of the Sarbanes-Oxley law and the changes and things promulgated by the SEC, Nike's board went ahead and made all the examination that we could to be certain first that everybody is an independent director. Independent means that they don't have any other relationship with a company that allows them to get income, that they don't serve on as any consultant to the company, that they are truly independent, and that they have the knowledge that's necessary. As we've added new directors, we are looking now, because you have the most dangerous job in the corporate world today is to be chairman of the audit committee, because that's where all of the fault lies, or you can be in trouble with. And you recruit people for that based upon the ground rules, that they generally know the rules of accounting and they knew the rules to be applied. Every other board with whom I'm familiar is going through the same search process. One of the things that we find is that people are less willing to expose themselves to serve on boards because they think that they are not either being properly rewarded or that it's too much risk for them to take. But the boards are changing. Another board I serve on has added 2 new members, dropped 2, and we will continue to do that until we get the balance that is reflected. Every company is doing this now. You will see a different makeup of the boards, and you will see the things that we're required to do are much more stringent. We are, for instance, required to have independent directors have an independent meeting outside of the hearing, not even on the same real estate, with the CEO, with the chief officers. And we make an analysis of them and report and act on it. And that's a level of independence that didn't exist on boards before. So there's going to be a great deal of change.
Do you think this change is already occurring?
Well, look, I'm not sitting in the boardroom. I'm told it's occurring, but I think that the question on all the things that Richard speaks to is addressing the issue of groupthink within the boardroom, the lack of independence, and defining independence financially exclusively may not be the only axis upon which we should examine it. But really what we want to do is shake the board and say, challenge the premise of what the CEO is saying. And I will throw out an idea that isn't mine. I wish it were. I'm not sure it would work, but it's certainly a creative thought, and it comes from a friend of mine who sits on a number of major boards who said that he was not going to join any additional boards unless the CEO or the chairman of a board, should they be separate, agreed once a year to invite into the boardroom the individual with the largest short position in the stock. And that would strike fear into most boards. They don't want to dignify that individual with an invitation. But if you want to get somebody in there who's going to say, here's why you're wrong, and let me tell you why your business strategy is fundamentally flawed, that might be the way to do it. And that might do more to spark the conversations that need to be had in the boardroom.
I think that's a very important point, because I've read, and I didn't look to the underlying information to verify this, but that in most of the instances with the corporations that we've been reading about in the last several months, they would satisfy the new requirements on independence. So if this is the triumph of form over substance, we haven't made any progress. It's the dynamics on that board that will make the difference. It's that challenging. And there's this groupthink that you mentioned. It is hard for a lot of people to stand out and be different than all of the rest of the directors.
I tried to vote against an acquisition once that the CEO wanted. Really tough. I like the idea of having the radicals in, because then it would make challenging board members not feel so embarrassed in that intimate small group around the table. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Margaret Rimler. I work for Iron Mountain, who's records management paper and email, electronic records management. And we're very focused on, we actually think we have two types of customers. We call them storage customers who just want to store things with us at a lower cost. And then we have records management customers who really understand records management and know the ins and outs. And so we're very interested in Sarbanes-Oxley, and how has that affected the way you all think of records management and how you need to approach that?
Well, anybody who disturbs or destroys a record, is probably on his way to Wire City. It is not the thing to have done. But by the same token, there are rules, and adopted rules that are obeyed gets you every place you have to go. All you have to do is follow the rules, tell everybody what the rules are, and do what the rules say. So it isn't the great ogre that it might be. However, the idea that you can mysteriously have records disappear is an invitation to an indictment.
Let me make 2 points. First, the good news is that most often when people think they've destroyed something, they haven't. And those of us who have subpoenas can often dig it up in ways that I certainly don't understand the technology of it, but it's amazing what the wizards on computers can pull up off these disks and hard drives, and BlackBerry messages that you think disappear into the ether. They don't. So that's the good news. The bad news is really that in those instances where people have succeeded in destroying documents, and there was a recent SEC fine, I think $8.65 million against 5 companies, so essentially 1.6 each or so. Who knows what liabilities were hidden by the destruction of those documents? So if you're just simply doing the Milton Friedman cost-benefit analysis on that document destruction, it probably paid. And that's the bad news. So, we're not going to live in a world where everything is retained forever, but there is a reality. We need to get corporations to do better in retaining those documents that will establish either the legitimacy or illegitimacy of what they're doing.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Darren Beek, consumer. My question is for Mr. Donahue and Mr. Smith. Do you operate in countries with known corrupt governments? And Mr. Spitzer, do you think that should be a crime?
Okay.
There's absolutely no question that there is corruption in many of the countries where we source our coffee.
And?
There's no question about it. There are very, very few places you can say that the government is not without some level of corruption.
But by doing that, aren't you funding the government?
Well, let me try to address what I gather is your concern. There is no purity in this world. You know, there's no government, there's no nation, there's no state, there's no locality that doesn't have some degree of corruption. The question is the company that is operating within that environment itself participating in a corrupt act? We have something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is a statute that makes it illegal to commit crimes. It is not illegal, nor do I believe it should be illegal, unless you're talking about a regime that is so far beyond our moral judgment that you simply say you have to boycott that nation. And, you know, I, like many others, said don't do business in South Africa during the period of apartheid. There are those instances. But if you are dealing with a nation where you have fundamental moral values, but you have a regime that nonetheless has certain elements of corruption, what we should make illegal is participation in those acts of corruption, not merely presence in that nation. Because then if we were to make it impossible for Starbucks or Nike to be present anywhere, then we would be denying those societies the benefits that are very real of having the presence of that economic vibrancy.
But companies like Nike have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which all our people know, so that if they're solicited, they report bribes, requests, and all of that stuff. We don't pay them.
Do either of you make any attempts to influence the government or the practices of those countries? I had a field study team last spring in Egypt looking at the role of American multinational corporations. This was post-9/11. We were very interested in what companies did on the ground to make a difference in Muslim countries. And it was very interesting because some American companies, including Procter & Gamble, were also bringing their standards to those countries. And Procter & Gamble helped Egypt get its first HMO because it wanted to give its employees the same level of health benefits that it gave them all over the world. And so it stimulated a change in practices in that country. Do you get involved in trying to stimulate a change? Do you think you do it passively by the kind of resources and commitments you make in those countries? Do you do it actively?
Well, we were in Vietnam, and we have our own school there because one of the things that people don't understand that public education is not public many places in the world, and it doesn't carry you beyond about the third or fourth grade. So we have set up our own schools so that our people can, and they do it on their own, they go to school, they get paid, and they get paid extra when they graduate. And they, therefore, can move into more middle management and perhaps generally management positions. But those are the things. We are the school. We have the playing fields. We provide all the equipment and things for the youngsters to play games, which is in our interest. We want healthy employees. We have our own health service. So we have our own physician or nurses in the plant, so that people can be treated. But we can't build hospitals and have operating rooms and all of that stuff. We do what we can to upgrade the lives of the people for who are employed by us.
So you do begin to change something about the societies in which you do business. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Arash Fair, and I'm also a student at Harvard Business School. I just want to refer back to Mr. Spitzer's comment about the role institutional investors should play as watchdogs. And I guess some of the thoughts that came to mind is if you think about Tyco under Dennis Kozlowski, it's acquiring 200 companies a year. Its stock price shot through the stratosphere. If you look at Enron and Jeff Skilling, it's a company whose business model was touted throughout the late 1990s across a lot of publications. And any investor who invested alongside Mike Milk in the 1980s did phenomenally well. So given these sort of instances where institutional investors can do so well, working alongside CEOs who eventually are disproven in the market, how can you reasonably expect institutional investors to take a very active role when the CEO has shown them a great shareholder return?
I think you're painting with too broad a brush. You're trying to draw comparisons between or among some investors who were able to manipulate accounting statements and use the accounting rules so that a string of acquisitions generated the appearance of a revenue stream and genuine profitability, which wasn't there, versus genuine investments on the part of many private equity investors and CEOs of public companies where the acquisitions were based upon good business models that institutional investors should have looked at and said, this is good. What it requires is the same diligent work that a CalPERS, a CalSTRS, Fidelity, a New York State pension fund can in fact do, because they are investing hundreds of billions of dollars and therefore have the capacity to delve into, if not every transaction, certainly those that are significant enough to understand whether or not these transactions generate value and what they had done. And I'm not suggesting that they will be there as quasi-investment bankers challenging every transaction, generating their own fairness opinions, but what I would suggest is that they have to be sufficiently aggressive to genuinely understand what the business model is and whether the acquisitions are meaningful. And I think you're using one point on the spectrum to say it's not feasible. I'm saying the other point on the spectrum at the very far end of a hands-off approach was perhaps a contributing factor to the downfall and the contribution to the management's excesses.
Thank you. And I see that we have long lines of questioners. We may not get to everybody. Try to keep your questions short, and we'll get to as many of you as we can before we have to end. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. My name is Evelyn Joseph, and this is my friend Chena, who's from the John D. O'Brien High School. And we were saying here about our U.S. history teacher should learn a little bit more what's going on today. Would it be possible if we could get an autograph?
Oh, well, that's an easy question. I'm sure that the panel will be happy to do that. How about right afterwards? Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
That's going to be hard to top. My name is Bob Buer. I work for Solomon Smith Barney in London, so we've been watching Mr. Spitzer's activity with a lot of interest. I have a question and a comment that leads to the question, which relates to Ms. Cantor's query earlier about differences between Europe and the United States. I spent a lot of time looking at European companies versus American companies, and there is a very substantial difference, which is until very recently, for all their faults in financial reporting, I'd get mid-year reports from European companies where the only information you got was sales and numbers of employees. And that was actually a relevant number for European companies, because a number of European companies regard what they're doing as, in a broader context, and one of their missions is employment. Or until very recently, one of their missions has been employment. That, of course, is inconceivable here, and that leads to the question of the general hostility in Washington, particularly in Congress and now the executive branch, to the kinds of increased regulatory attention that institutional investors, among others, want to see. And this strikes me as being something of a roadblock. We've had one incident already where a potential candidate for the accounting's board was apparently vetoed by the White House because he wanted to be too aggressive on behalf of investors. What can be done to make even if institutional investors wanted to be more aggressive, how can they be, given the sort of lack of enthusiasm in Washington for increased attention to these areas?
Elliot?
Well, let me take a stab at that from two perspectives, at least. One, I don't think you can absolve institutional investors of their responsibility by saying Washington's making it difficult. Equity ownership has obligations, rights, responsibilities. If I'm CalPERS and I own 4% of the company, trust me, the CEO is going to return my phone call and sit down with me and pay attention to me, regardless of what Washington may or may not want. So I don't think that institutional investors can hide behind the deregulatory spasm we've gone through in Washington, much of which may have been good, some of which certainly has not played out the way we expected. But I don't think that excuses institutional investors. When it comes to Washington, I would say that what we need to do is challenge the Chicago School. I mean, I think what we need to do is stand up and say the Chicago School model that said the market will solve all, independently, inherently, market failure doesn't exist. The market will overcome problems of discrimination, price fixing, the price inelasticity, all those things. They're wrong. People need to stand up and say that model is wrong. It doesn't work. There are times when you need an appropriate degree of guidance in the marketplace, and everybody from Teddy Roosevelt on down has gotten that fact.
Good answer.
It's also true, by the way, that many European companies now are reporting much more than just those few simple numbers. They're issuing environmental sustainability reports. The British Board of Chartered Accountants, or whatever they're called, is now requiring a triple bottom line reporting. So all of these other issues are increasingly part of the reporting required in Europe. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Ann Schwartz, and I have a question that we've talked about. you all agree that business cannot solve social problems or education or whatnot. What can be done to stop the corporations from taking their business and their taxes elsewhere, to not pay American taxes, so we would have the taxes to provide services and education for everyone?
Are you talking about the companies that were trying to move offshore to Bermuda, et cetera? Elliot, that's another one in your evaluation.
It has been growing all along.
Well, there are two ways that I can think of quite easily. One, pass a law that prohibits the move offshore and creates tax disincentives to doing it, which certainly should have passed Congress. I'm not sure exactly where the bill stands, but my understanding was that the leadership in the House, the Republican leadership, wouldn't let it go through, which is a shame. The other thing is that shareholders can flex their muscles, and that has happened in a number of cases where, especially pension funds that have had investments in companies, have said, wait a minute, we have a real interest here, and you're not taking all the jobs and moving them to a distant point. And so, again, the equity owners can stand up and be heard and say there's a value beyond the earnings per share on a quarterly basis. We want you to keep the jobs here and the revenue stream here. Now, again, others may disagree and say that the expatriation of capital has a more significant impact in Costa Rica, where you can do more for other people. So it's sometimes a tougher issue, but shareholders have to vote and Congress has to pass the right laws.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. And we'll try to get one from each side, and then we're going to wrap up. Sorry. Quick question.
My concern is about like corporations that are putting things into communities in terms of hazardous things. One, everyone can relate to the tobacco industry.
Can you identify yourself, please?
I'm a student from Emmanuel College. My name is Kathleen Banfield. And an example would be what the telecommunications industry is doing in terms of putting like cell towers in communities that are trying to fight these hazardous things. It's not inconclusive scientifically as thus far, but whatever happened to better safe than sorry, and what can be done in terms of that when communities don't have the money or the means to fight these things, and when media is funded by corporations and politicians are funded by corporations, then what can be done to regulate all this that's happening?
Okay, there are a lot of assumptions built into your question. Would anyone like to?
Facts.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you. Anyone like to respond to that issue about communities wanting to take on corporate causes and companies having all of the power? Let me just ask you in another way. Two executives sitting here, do you feel all powerful when you go to work every day?
Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
But certainly the people who have an interest and concern about these things can really have an influence on the outcome. Unfortunately, we have instances where there are communities who do not want our presence. And when that's the case, they often prevail. So you do have probably more power than you think.
And I think we've been hearing throughout that consumers and sophisticated investors, if they exercise their voice, can have power. Yes, ma'am. Last question, and I'll wrap up.
First of all, I use all your products and like them very much.
Can you identify yourself,
Clara
please?
Serpa. I'm a former corporate trainer. Since 9/11, I moved from upstate New York back to Boston, where I thought things would be better economically, but of course they were not. So I did the sensible thing and went back to school and joined the UMass C school, not the B school. My question really is mostly to Ms. Cantor, actually. So I think you're fair game, okay, even though you're the moderator.
Sure.
One of the particular people who I don't see up here, but I saw in 60 Minutes the other night and has been on television a lot, has been the CEO of Malden Mills, Aaron Furstein, and maybe you've had him other times. My question is, I'm very impressed that you went to Egypt and care all about these things worldwide with the B school students, but perhaps you could rally some resources to help keep that company going with their Polytech equipment, or maybe Mr. Donahue with his contacts, or others could assist. It may not be a lot, but in Lawrence, Mass, it's several hundred people, and they did everything they could out of their own pocket. He kept that company going. He does not have a big exit clause, nor a big corporate portfolio, but lives very modestly, and this is something that maybe the Kennedy Library needs to take up. Or maybe the Harvard Business School needs to put some resources there to give that man some assistance. He's 76 years old, and I think he sets a great example, as do all of you.
Thank you for reminding us that there are heroes in the corporate world, in addition to the people that were sitting here, and there are heroes that put their employees first, and that we ought to not only honor them, but help them. I think we have to bring this to a close. I'm sorry for those questioners that didn't get a chance to talk. This has clearly been a very stimulating and far-ranging discussion. The topic is so broad. We've covered everything from whether or not certain people should go to jail, whether there are crooks out there, to how the good guys can do even more to fix the world. What this clearly says is that we have so much riding on businesses, particularly large businesses, and what they do. Corporations do have a broad set of responsibilities, whether that's written into the laws or not. We've said that it's not all just a matter of rules and obeying the letter of the law or even putting it in the letter of the law, that a lot of it has to do with leadership and values, making sure that the institutions are in place and that the institutions are taking responsibility for policing and being watchdogs and provoking good behavior, but then in companies themselves, rewarding leaders who promulgate values, that this all can't be done by rules, it also has to be done by leadership. And so it's a privilege to sit here on the stage today with three people who are taking leadership, each in your own sectors, to make this possible, because ultimately it does come down to a matter of values. What the country is what we believe in. And if we believe that responsibility to others is a major part of our responsibility as individuals, it's how we gain respectability, and it's how we live with ourselves, then we will require different behavior of our leaders. And I think what Orrin Smith said about the power that communities do have to require that behavior by speaking up is very important. So thank you for being here tonight and speaking up, and thank you to all of you for coming.